Okay, I'm still seeing people not getting notices that we're going live. Platform silencing is an issue. Really, it's contemptible, no less, that we were sold this idea of a community square, a place to stay in touch with our friends across the world. And then what happens? They finally reveal to us something people like me always knew. We're merely a commodity, as always. So it's very important to let people know. And I will pull up this other browser so I can see what all of you wonderful people are sharing with us tonight. Alrighty. Got wonderful Taras singing in the background as always. I'm a big fan of Taras. Taras Kompanechenko. He is a real amazing fellow. And I hope to get more of the items recorded to show that we have much to do with the hold on. Post note, sorry. New note.
Всім свободи, поєднаймось, як брати, сонцем правди, світлом сходи, Боже, шлях наш просвіт.
There we go. Okay. Also, the new article is up. I worked on it quite a bit. The Heavenly 100 article is live on Substack. Hey, bro.
No, let me put you the right way up.
That's okay. Turn your room sideways since you're glued to the wall.
Let me just change the direction of the house and turn it round.
Good. It's like Inception, but different, right?
Yeah, for sure, yeah. I forgot we're portrait on this, not landscape. I forget.
You know what's interesting? I will compliment, for as weird as the technology on here is sometimes, that it it figures it out when it puts it side by side for horizontal on YouTube, and then it does this for everything else. So we're just squares.
There we go. That's better. You can see me better now. Can you hear me okay?
The squares, yeah. I love the cans on the head.
I've got to, my hearing's gone today for some reason, and I can't hear it on my phone too well, so I've had to put the cans on today, but that's okay, I suppose.
Exactly.
It does the job. How the devil are you, pal?
Well, I'm learning lessons about my inner compass on a daily level. So I try to always figure out what's bugging me and where both the positive energy comes from and the stressful energy. And I am driven to work and serve Ukrainians in such a way that when I say, what is it that's got you so stressed? It's the seriousness of the people that we deal with, that we care about.
Oh, yeah.
And the fact that I don't take it lightly is usually at the root of whatever is driving me fucking nuts. So I wanted to go across today to Maidan, since I know on Day of Heavenly 100 today that there are events that happened, and you're not going to get to the one with the Z-Man up there, Zelensky, because that's very quartered off. They have their specialized event, and
Yeah.
So I happened to have filmed yesterday, thank God, and I'm actually posting it right now as we speak. But I want to, before we start into some of the very important discussion, I just want our friends to recognize that we are at an anniversary mark, 12 years since Yanukovych killed 107 Ukrainians who were simply fighting for their freedom. And I take the task that we have at hand in that spirit. So I go down there often throughout the year, but I especially go on the 20th every year to, internalize what I learned from my friends, who these people were, not as just faces on plaques, but that I have friends who know these folks and who can tell me the stories of what happened. So that's part of what was driving my engine today. Like my engine was like, get it done. And so there's pas de stress. There's so much to do.
Yeah, I had a weird day. I was just talking to like Welsh people in Dnipro. It's kind of funky. Two Welsh politicians, and they're twinning Pavlograd with Pontypridd, the home of Tom Jones, in Wales today. So we're going to do a story on that tomorrow and do some filming today for that. And quite an unusual story, really, the twin of two mining towns, which is quite interesting, and the relationships they've built over since before the full-scale invasion and what they're doing now. So quite an interesting story I'm working on tomorrow. But the snow's back. It went +7 and now it's all back. It's bloody crazy. 2 feet of snow.
In fact, what am I looking at for tomorrow here? Because we're at the tail end of the snap. It's already frozen on the ground, but now it's baking into solid ice because the temperature is not changing. So for the next couple of days, what do we have? Let's see. It's 22 Fahrenheit outside. Let me shift to a language I know. Celsius. I live here now. -6. So it's -6 today. Tomorrow it'll be a high of -1, and it'll be -12 tomorrow, a high of -3. And then -11 on Sunday. Before this next week, we finally get a little bit above. And
And what's worse is by mid-March, it will be springtime. I keep telling people the transition between cold and hot goes very quickly in Ukraine, far quicker than I remember.
Oh yeah. So although last year the summer was so bizarre because I remember in July suddenly wearing a sweater again.
Yeah. And you have like the anniversary, the thermals come off, and you have like a party for it because you don't have thermals in mid-March. So, mid-March, I think it was the weather starts to warm up, I reckon, and Putin would have spent billions on a winter campaign that failed yet again. I'm pretty sure of it.
Well, let's talk about that. We're at this next Tuesday. We're at the 4-year mark since Putin decided to be the snake who wanted to eat a goat. And if you've ever seen those images or videos of a beast that thinks I'm going to totally get, and then they choke to death on the thing they're trying to consume. That's how I see Ukraine in Russia's throat. Is like, how's it going? Is it going good? Yeah, swallow.
Yeah,
I mean, so well.
We gotta be careful not to oversell it. It's still very difficult. Some areas are still very bad. There's been a noticeable change. Absolutely. What we're going to say, what we're going to say now is we're not expecting Ukraine to break through and end up building defense positions in Mariupol. This is not what this is about when we say power shift and things are changing. But noticeably, they are physically changing everywhere. It's very difficult because we've put a structure down in an order that we have to go through here. So I'm going to sort of go with the structure we've built rather than get to sort of jumble it all up. But
we want to thank our friends. I see some great friends that are signing in. I see Yael is in here, KKP's in here, Dave's in here, Professor Bong's in here, and just some people that I think have been like the team, that auxiliary team out there that cares about Ukraine so much. And then we have an American and a Brit here to talk about our lives here and what we see. And
might be worth saying we had far more watchers after the event than we did, and we had 150 people on the last episode, which is a live show. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
So I think we could keep going with this and this format, and hopefully get better. Like you said, we'll put some
every Friday. Every Friday. Plus we can squeeze in like a Sunday report. This next week, we got a lot of things to talk about in the next few days as we hit the 4-year anniversary mark. And but let's start with how the center of gravity is shifting. What you think? Що думаєш, bro?
I think we are it's taken 4 years to get to the most critical point of the war at the moment. And I'm saying that as someone who's lived here, followed it like yourself. And where largely parts of the conflict currently have been in favor of Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Food out now, that freezer. So, and that's why I have allowed me. So, I think we're at a critical point where, essentially, this is make or break for either side. I think we're coming to a point where this is going to go to the end. There's going to be no. I'm pretty sure, with what's happening, what we're going to talk about over the next hour, this will go all the way to a winner and a loser, because so many things happen. Let's start with what we talked about, battle room to the backroom deals. We pretty much know the state of the front line at the moment. Summarize quickly, Russia's making small gains. They're paying huge costs and huge prices for those small gains. And recently, Ukraine have launched a counterattack. And I say that loosely. When you work in the military here and you say counterattack, people envision hundreds and thousands of men going forward and trying to try to recapture, areas of the front line using hundreds of thousands of people to stop move forward. It's not like that. It's when I say counterattack, there are some elements and big movements and big firefights and battles going on. But a lot of it can be just 4 guys. Talking to my friend last weekend, 4 guys going into a village that has 2 Russians in it, and their only order has been to move forward. You got to remember, there's a 20-kilometer, maybe even more, kill zone where people are going in, and you could quite happily send 4 guys in, and they'll take 2 or 3 villages from Russians. And that's essentially what's going on at the moment, because Russia's propaganda is making battlefield advances. However, they don't have fire control. They don't have proper support in those areas. So what Ukraine are exceptionally good at doing is moving faster, quicker, coordinated attacks, combined arms, far better than the Russians, who are, logistics have been hit, emaciated in some areas, lack of support, only being supplied by drones, no official orders. Skylink's messed them completely up. So essentially, Ukraine
losing Telegram.
Losing Telegram, which is a massive killer. I mean, for them, as we talked about before, many Ukrainians use Telegram. Many Russians is the number 1 app who use it to get around, to talk quickly, secure to people on the front lines. And there is a rumor that Russia has no idea exactly where all its frontline troops are. So this is how bad it's become, to the point this week, we'll touch on the first subject. Russia has gone online to tell us that the losing Starlink has no effect on the military. The Ministry of Defense allowed on today, which, if you live next door to Russia, and those of you who follow this war, that means exactly the total opposite. You don't go on any media to tell them nothing. You just wouldn't do it, and nothing's had an effect. You just wouldn't go onto any media. You don't go onto media to say, no, everything's okay, nothing's happened. So it's a really good sign that it's actually worse than it is. Russia's really struggled. And in the same few weeks, they've now pulled all Western social media apps, which is I don't want to jump the gun here, but we've got an hour. But, that's a big indicator that a Soviet regime that, cut its teeth in the Soviet era is now knee-jerk reaction is to go back to that time, reduce the audience of the mistakes that Putin and the regime are making, reduce the size of the audience, because remember, those promises were made in 2022 that it was a 3-day war. We touched on it on the last pod.
And think about all those guys who were in those BMPs, right, who went on exercises. And I have documented their charred carbon bodies. They didn't have a plan at that level. They were just, summarily thrown across the border to seize something. So there wasn't. I strongly believe that there wasn't a strong belief in the Kremlin that this was going to be an extended, protracted invasion of any kind that would require all of the additional planning that's necessary to pull off such a thing.
Yeah, I did totally. And look at who they had a quick mobilization. They had to forcibly mobilize people after, which nearly caused a 700,000 maximum exodus of brain drain of Russia because of the forced mobilization. So that was pretty soon after the launch of the full-scale invasion. They were trying to conscript people straight away. So that tells you the bad planning and the bad organization behind it, and the total unpreparedness against the Ukrainians who, valiantly fought back in Mariupol and Kyiv to stop that advance from coming all the way in. So, straight from the off, it was essentially bad intelligence, bad planning. And it's still going on today where they're trying to buy back their air defense systems from countries.
Yeah, I saw that. Right.
So it's very bad. And so the Soviet and the Russian, its size was its dominance. Size was the scary part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine have just unlocked that over 4 years now as being its Achilles heel, economically, strategically, military. It's unlocking that by hitting everywhere, or to the point where Russia doesn't know where the next shot's coming from. Is it going to hit Crimea? Is it going to get 1,600 kilometers behind the front lines in Russia somewhere? So that dynamic shift from, if you go back to the start of the war, where it was all reactive, Ukraine was retreating back, it was fighting for time, it was totally being bombed, it couldn't return or retaliate with anything. America was putting restrictions on what it could use to hit inside Russia, to now fast forward to 2025, and we're going to break this down. But you fast forward to 2025, now you've got 200 or 300 Ukrainian drones going into Russia, causing blackouts. Now you've got ballistic missiles going into Russia, causing, serious damage with ammunition dumps, oil recycling plants. Now they're hitting power nodes and command nodes in Russia. This is now, Putin's now got a situation where he started a war, as you touched on, started a war. He can't land it. He can't get off it. He's on it. It's on a war economy, and now it's all everything's tied into the war. And
what do you think happens though? What do you think happens in the planning though when they're having to just go through the kitchen cupboard and the garage bins and looking for what they have left to throw? Because from an American point of view, with how the military works, I've always reminded people the American military could say, "I want a Burger King next door." Boom, there's a Burger King next door. I want a Dairy Queen. Yeah, there's a Dairy Queen. So logistical pipelines are beyond highly efficient. And yet, I know there's a lot of planning that has to go into not just getting the gear, but how the strategy will develop according to that gear. So what do you think the consequences are when they're throwing everything down to the kitchen sink?
Well, let's start with the military personnel, for example. I mean, the reason you're cutting all Western social media and Telegram and trying to drive everybody to a government app is because you want to spy on people. You're worried about what they're saying. You're worried about what they're doing, what they're conspiring to do. So the FSB, essentially control the country. And essentially they want to move everybody onto their app so they can spy on them. That isn't because the country is doing well. That's because it's failing. And now it's frightened because, as we touched on the last pod, Prigozhin opened the door to all this. We thought it was a slick Russian propaganda machine that was driven by the FSB. What Prigozhin has done is open to the world that it's not. It's open. It's a bunch of egos controlling it, different factions, splinter groups. Prigozhin got unchallenged. Nobody challenged him. He got all the way nearly to Moscow before he was talked out of it and stopped. And we all know what happened to him. But he unlocked what you're seeing now, which is growing animosity with Russian meal bloggers. People asking why. Why are we failing at this? We're Russia, the second most powerful army in the world, and we're reliant on Western tech to get us into, so this has been a deeply embarrassing week and a month for Putin, who's now trying to rein that in by, pulling in social media. So the idea is to reduce the audience to, frankly, a manageable size and ignore the problems that are igniting while still promoting the patriotic SMO that they're trying to still promote. And it's got to the point where the propaganda, as we touched on, and I'm going to summarize it because we've got to get onto the points. It's got to the point where propaganda is now falsifying cities they're taking and towns just to make it look like they're making progress. Propaganda is only good as the truth, as we said before.
Propaganda is only as good as long as that lie can live in the space. Once the lie shuts down, you have to go to the other, right?
Otherwise, it just becomes bullshit and everyone sees it. And that's where Russia is now. That's where the mill blogger community is. That's where people are arguing. That's why the people at the front now are asking questions and going, hold on, what's this war? And then we're going to go into this bigger picture, this episode, and talk about why we think that's the case and what's happening globally. Because now everything's interlinked. Epstein's interlinked with Ukraine now.
Right.
You've got the politics in Iran now interlinked with Ukraine now. You've got China stepping in to supply Russia. Are they? Aren't they? It's that bad. You've got Venezuela, which is now interlinked to, the Ukraine and Russia war here. So, it isn't a regional conflict. It's already a worldwide world war, essentially. It's just not called that at the moment. But the economies and everything now, and all the rhetoric is now geared up globally. Cuba is another one that's coming into the mix now. Who's just visited Russia, who's probably flapping after they've seen Venezuela and Russia not able to support its ally Venezuela. Now Cuba's sweating because now you've got America going into Iran, possibly launching an attack in Iran. So that's another ally of Russia. And then on the back of that, you've got peace talks going on. So this is now global rhetoric. This is now essentially not all Putin is turning this into a global conflict. There's a lot to do with America in this as well, and Europe, and where, the weaknesses of Europe, the rhetoric of Trump, and the frailties now of Putin, who looks very frail and very weak. Essentially now he's reining everything in. So, we're living in a pretty much a dicey time, a really difficult time for Putin, something he's never seen and I've never seen through my lifetime. Putin's under some serious pressure.
So this is why they have to resort to the diplomatic, and I'm going to use the word in quotes, diplomatic ground game of active measures programs again, where they go out and find ways to get Europe to turn on each other, to get, like you saw Fico come up, bark up. You see this last few days, Viktor Orban wouldn't shut the fuck up. And the bark dogs come out whenever the noise machine is needed.
Yeah, absolutely. I would go as far as to say that every time Putin's under pressure, Trump comes in and relieves that, or Orban comes in and relieves that and takes that pressure away. Trump will say something ridiculous, like Zelensky needs to get a move on with this peace deal. That captures the headlines. Suddenly, everyone's looking at Zelensky going, what do you think about that? When really, it's Putin that we should be asking these questions to. Like, why do you keep ignoring the fact or, denying a ceasefire?
Right.
Why? That you would think would be the most major point in really pushing a peace process, that they'll be willing to have a ceasefire. Nope, it's just not happening. Putin doesn't want it. So we go back to his original aims, even at Christmas, and even last week he was saying, I'm going to fulfill my SMO militarily. But if you pull out from that, what you have is a Putin that started out with Kyiv in 2022, who's now reliant on a Trump administration, and he's bartering over Donetsk, Oblast, and the rest of that, which he spent 11 years trying to take. Now he's looking to the Americans to try and give it to him.
Right.
So this is where Putin is, but that narrative is not being challenged only by people like us and people like who follow the war intensely, who are now challenging that narrative. Hold on a minute. You wanted Kyiv. Now you're trying to haggle for Donetsk Oblast. Putin needs to win.
And Zelensky said that's not going to happen. One of the things that I was kind of looking at was this. What was the strategy between this reported rift between the Yermak side of the delegation, or Yermak influence side of the delegation, and the Budanov delegation? Because Budanov was going to go for the free economic zone, which is not what Russia wants to call it. For our viewers, let's make sure that we understand terms. Russia wants to call it a demilitarized zone, and America wanted to call it a free economic zone. So Budanov chooses to use the American wording, not the Russian wording. That's important. He's a man of strategy. He's a brilliant man, no less. And I was looking, well, what's his calculation here? And I honestly don't know, because I don't try to do speculative stuff very much. I'd rather stick to what's observable.
Me too.
But I know he's a strategy guy, so that's the first part. That's the observation. But it was kind of settled with Zelensky saying today that there is not going to be a surrender of territory. And you and I addressed this before. And when I talk to Ukrainian soldiers I know who've really done the hard work, commanders who have missing limbs even, asking them to give up territory their brothers are buried in until further notice, etc. Okay, що це, bro? No що ти, bro? Suka. Anyway, so what time is it to be doing construction, please? Anyway.
It's always happens. So, I'm waiting for Loki to come in and jump across.
Right. Someone's getting a tooth canal. But he basically, Zelensky just said out loud what I knew was going to be said, which I know commanders who have said, well, unless you just want to revolt from the army itself, that's not going to happen.
Yeah. It's. I mean, there's a lot going on. Another thing is mobilization. I mean, there's talk that the reason that the social media has been reined in is because he wants control when he mobilizes people. Forced mobilization is a big no-no in Russia. It's an indication of how far his narrative and his promises have fallen. It's an admission of fail. So we're at a point where Russians now think they could be conscripted, forcibly conscripted again, which, like I said, left a massive brain drain and a mass exodus from Russia, which means that he's got to, potentially increase his repression on Russians, which is going to cause some serious friction. You already go to jail for obviously speaking negatively about the SMO. So where's this going to go? So I don't think you're going to get a rebellion. I think he's so controlled because most people are just arguing that they're not killing Ukrainians effectively. But at some point, that's going to snap. They're definitely what I say. It's going to snap. Even the self-proclaimed governor of Donetsk has just been arrested in the course. His name eludes me quite now, but I'm sure I'll find it again. But he's just been arrested, for speaking negatively about the SMO. So, Putin is arresting all those people that were pro SMO. He's arrested all those people that were for the war. Look at Igor, look at Kalashnikov. Look at all these people are now speaking and challenging Putin, who were originally pro-war. So this speaks volumes. This speaks volumes. The aliens are landing.
Just an odd time at 7:00 at night to be doing. It's been quiet all day except me yelling at the gear. So all of a sudden,
someone's putting a picture frame up. Someone's putting a picture frame up. The worst thing, I do so many tweets. I'm trying to find a name, and I'm thinking, did I really put that many tweets out? Pavel Gorbrev, the self-proclaimed.
That's right, Pavel. Right.
He was arrested recently. So this tells you how bad this is in Russia at the moment. That there's a lot of people challenging and asking questions openly. Even Igor Girkin, as we said, is writing from prison negatively. So that should tell you everything, Excuse me.
Yeah, so and actually, I'm pouring over the 2013 into 2014 all the time. There's a lot of because I have a cumulative knowledge. I'm still trying to go back into some of the roots of those pre 2014 moments where we have the lead-in moment, the lead-in activities. And, Strelkin is still always going to be an interesting resource on that. And we had, you mentioned Prigozhin. there is a vibe of Prigozhin 2.0 in the air.
Yeah, I mean, the general that just recently got shot had a major rift with Wagner and Prigozhin. This is another possibility that you've got in Russia, that there's factions now forming, splitting. Some people just see the end of Russia economically. Some people are realizing they're not making money. Some people don't want to go on holiday in North Korea anymore. They want their trips to Paris. Some people can see the Soviet Union closing in and communications iron curtains coming up, and you need chits and permission to leave the country. That's all coming back, baby. That's the Soviet Union coming back, baby. If you don't know anything about the Soviet Union, you're now starting to watch the start of it. And we grew up with it. So this is nothing, sort of, and those things we're seeing again. We're seeing those repeated things again, which is really interesting time to sort of be in journalism and reporting. Because, I mean, not only have you got Epstein, you've got one of the biggest scandals ever on the planet, involving presidents on both sides, leading figures. You've got a war in Russia and Ukraine, potentially a war in Iran coming up. I mean, this is just, we're living. So I looked at a tweet earlier. Somebody said, we're now living in a timeline where Biff got the sports almanac in Back to the Future. And I thought that was hilarious. And
that's a funny one.
Because if you go now, we've got America now trying to, so many mixed messages coming out of the Trump administration. A board of peace, the Secretary of War, you've then got
a judge invoking 1984. A judge this week invoked 1984 over the slavery plaque on the George Washington House in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, literally saying you can't get more Orwellian than this.
Then now he's just got Supreme Court's just overruled these tariffs. You can't make those things. Now you've got to pay a backlog of all those billions that he's taken back to those countries, which is going to absolutely piss Trump off. And then you've got the midterms in November, which, if all goes to plan and, Trump loses the Senate and Congress and control, that's Putin's war done. Support for Trump will be done. He can't.
Mill bloggers today, Russian mill bloggers, and they're supporting the chatter sphere in Hilslavazino. There's about 20 of them I monitor on a regular basis, and they were talking in celebration that support for Ukraine from America was down 40 times what it had been previously, including the sales under Pearl. I would have to redo the math because they lie, but they lie in a certain direction often. And they're celebrating that. In fact, under Donald Trump, aid has pretty much nearly been cut off.
Yeah, absolutely has, and nobody could deny that. I mean, from the minute he got in, it was stopping armaments before he was even president. So, he's not a Ukraine fan. However, I did see a statistic saying over 80% of Americans think that Trump is guilty in the Epstein files, which is now, as it's unwinding in this sort of embryonic stage, it's looking more like this was, a Russian sting job or an intelligence sting job where, that's all coming out slowly but surely, even to the point where Prince Andrew and royalty has now been arrested in the UK, which means he's guaranteed he's going to spill the beans on what's going on. There's no doubt about that. They're going to seize all his computers, seize all his emails, seize all his stuff. So I'm pretty sure we're just seeing the starts of this, and heads are going to roll. And that's all linked to Russia. That's all linked to compromise. And that's all linked to girls, money, sex, tapes. I mean, it's becoming more and more linked to sort of maybe the decisions Trump's making, because
here's another thing I found interesting. I found another thing interesting this week. Two things. I'll do it in reverse.
Guilty as fuck.
Guilty as fuck. Exactly.
Yeah. Sorry, we're allowed to swear. Sorry.
Congratulations. Yeah, on this platform we're going to. First, I'll use the other one just as a placeholder, that the UK has said you're not using our bases to attack Iran, so that's important. And I wrote about this a few weeks back when I said, what happens when Europe says not using our facilities anymore and rejects the Rome Statutes. But I'm just going to blow that off. I have to blow that off. But the other thing is that look who showed up at the negotiations, if you will, instead of letting Ukraine sit there quietly with America at the table and Russia at the table. The other European delegation showed up as well, and it seems to have had a pretty good effect of saying, really, you're going to muscle them around a bit? Well, not without us.
Yeah, I mean, this is a whole thing that we've got to watch at the moment. We've talked about, I'm trying not to talk about stuff we've already talked about in this hour or so. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions now about Witkoff, about his Kirill Dmitriev, and about, go and beat him up. So, yeah, there's a lot of Kirill Dmitriev, their business dealings. Is this an honest broker, America? No, is my opinion. Absolutely not. From the word go. And the press releases and how he's reacting to the media regarding Zelensky. This is someone who's picked a side. And as a part of the broker, that's done and dusted. If Trump goes into, and I'll come to Europe in a minute, if Trump goes into Iran, that's a major partner. That's an ally who's been there supplying drones since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. So that being said, that will scupper the peace plan anyway. So that's where you sit at the moment, is if that Trump goes into Iran, that's the peace deal dead in the water anyway. There's no way. So is Trump going to switch and suddenly go for... Timing's impeccable.
We're going to try this.
So anyway, the timing is impeccable. So you just throw me now. So so when we sit there and talk about where this peace process is going, already a Trump invasion of Iran would essentially scupper that peace process, because that would be Venezuela, that would be then Iran, both are allies with Russia, and essentially Trump, one of the good things he's done is extend some of the sanctions on Russia, which is right and should be. They've not nothing to warrant any release of sanctions, especially the Olympic Committee, what they've done to allow people to compete under their flags, Russia and Belarus, is beyond me. I have no idea. So I think they're still trying to normalize, what Russian atrocities. I still think the Trump administration is trying to paper over the atrocities that are committed here, and I think they were failing that. I think, and where Europe are, I have no idea, to be honest. Yes, they're up in their defensive spends. Yes, they're getting their asses in gear, supplying more money. Yes, the Ramstein was quite a successful Ramstein.
Peter Powell has said this week that they fulfilled the artillery obligations that the Czech initiative worked for.
Yeah.
So, which is good because
we're producing
Czechia is a little divided,
60% of our own ammunition to fight.
That's right.
70% to fight the Russians, which was always going to be about, and that leads you back to the power shift I was talking about earlier. That power shift is steadily moving towards Ukraine, and that essentially is where Trump's sort of Russia's going to win, and Trump's sort of dominance over the talks and his leverage to interfere with these talks is slowly disappearing as the months go on. Ukraine has taken back the same, over the amount of territory in the last month or so that it took 6 months for Russia to get.
Right.
So 200 square kilometers. So essentially, Ukraine is making good ground getting the areas back that Russia lost so many people to try and take. So it's definitely changing and swinging back into Ukraine's favor, which is great news. How manpower and the momentum, if it will keep going, I don't know. We're just about to get the rainy seasons here. The ground's hard at the moment, so there's a good time to assault. Tracked vehicles can be used, but when the rains come, everything's going to stop. And then there'll be a spring offensive for sure. So I can't see any peace this year. Maybe next year, the end of next year, probably. But I can't see any peace this year. There's nothing that tells me that there's going to be peace, especially what's going on globally. And if Trump's leverage continues to dissipate as it is, Trump will want to be on the winning side.
Right.
He will sit there and go, well, I solved the Ukraine and Russian crisis because I backed the winner. He'll back Ukraine.
Everyone's given him an opportunity this last year to back the winner.
They're waiting for it. Europe's waiting for it, which is really bad. That's really bad. Rather than getting on with it, they're just waiting for America to turn. And that's a 50-50 gamble.
One of our viewers here, Patrick, wrote, the bulk of 47's money is now in the Middle East. I don't think he will hit Iran and threaten his bankers nearby. Building on that, I would say that he makes a good point that the Middle East countries, including Turkey, they do have an interesting leverage in this war. Frequently, they tend to be middle brokers on everything from returning defenders, as you know.
Yeah.
Very well.
And the kids and the children.
Yeah, and the kids and the children, 2,000 of which were returned this week. So the fact that the money is all in the area and the power that gives those countries to say, hey, do your airstrikes if that makes you feel comfortable and horny for the day, but otherwise you're not invading. And unlike Iraq, Iran is substantive enough in its ability to defend itself that a ground invasion is impossible. That's not going to happen. So you'll just have an airstrike campaign to show off for the cameras.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then consequences of the shit to pick up because of it.
And America's shit picking all the time at the moment. I mean, for me, I think the biggest thing is Trump seems to be flip-flopping. He doesn't know where he's going. I touched on it earlier with the board of peace. I mean, you've got Argentina, who's came cap in hand to America to be bailed out their economy. He's obviously going to be there. Orban, who's a Russian sympathizer, he's obviously going to be there. There's no real substance there. Nobody wants to. I mean, Tony Blair's there.
Right.
Oh my God, he's now become a mouthpiece for Trump, which is kind of strange with the job roles he's held in the Middle East before. So, it isn't anything worth its salt. In a year's time, we probably won't be hearing anything of the board of peace. In my view, because there's no substance. This is a money-making scheme of some sort. I mean, I've heard reports this week that he wants to take $10 billion from U.S. purse, put into it, and it's bizarre how he's allowed to get away with all this. So I don't want to go too much into that, but certainly, the more domestic issues that happen in the U.S. Essentially are putting pressure on this peace process. You know yourself, Russia will utilize anything it can to get an upper hand in any negotiations. If you start having the Epstein files come out with all the leading people in, including the president, that could be incorporated into the worst acts of criminalism, they're going to utilize that. And if they've got something on him, they're going to out it. They're going to push it. Right. They're going to say, they're going to use anything in this Epstein to put pressure on the Trump administration. So I think we're just at the beginning of this. And this is going to unfold.
This one news bit came out, and of course we have to remind everyone that this would have happened months ago. It would have happened last summer probably. Was that Valery Zelensky was in an interview this week with AP where he said that Paul Manafort had approached him about assisting in his campaign for office, and he said, not interested in your services. But that and considering what today is, 12 years since 107 Ukrainians, actually more than that if you consider countrywide, but the Heavenly 100 were killed. Paul Manafort is a pariah's pariah here. And for him to have gone to Zelensky, we know that there's only two snakes that would have sent him, and both emanate from the Kremlin.
Well, I mean, it goes deeper than that. I said to you, I was here last summer when Trump sent his envoys to talk to all of Zelensky's opposition. And my friend who was involved in that, who will remain nameless, said, the Americans are in town. I said, why are the Americans in town? He said, to try to organize a coup, was his exact words. And I was like, I never thought I'd be ever saying this. I never thought in a year I would cancel my trip to America out of fear that I could be recognized as an Interpol wanted person. I never thought I would be sitting there seeing an American president trying to, essentially welcome a genocidal killer onto American territory, a red carpet treatment, who personally slaughtered over 25,000 people, including women and children in Mariupol. And that's a conservative figure. I never thought I'd be seeing Russia enter, US territory, not even on neutral territory. I would never think I would see a US president hang a picture of Putin above his family on the wall of the White House. I never thought, I mean, we're starting to see, this is just, I mean, it infuriates me, to be honest, that we're seeing this. And I know many Americans support Ukraine. And I know, friends of mine who are Republicans who support Ukraine. They are deeply upset. And even Don Bacon, Adam Kinzinger, Denver Riggleman, they're all campaigning against Trump. So we are just stuck until the midterms, unfortunately. And then Trump's going to have his hands tied. And we're back to Trump takes all the oxygen out of the room. Before that, it was just Putin. We had 12 hours of Putin and we got 12 hours off. We could have a sleep. Now it's 24 hours of shit. It's weekly news in a day. It's just day after day of just, coming from the Trump administration. Anything they do is pro-Russian. I think certainly the pulling of humanitarian days were.
Yeah, the press conference 2 days ago when I can't remember, Carolyn, whatever her name is, said, what we mourn for the Russians, and the Ukrainians.
Yesterday, the day before, yeah.
Yeah, it's like you can't stop saying that, can you? You just can't calculate that this is not an equal sum game of two sides just fighting and having war and
I feel
dying.
sorry for the Russians.
When you feel sympathy for the invaders and you feel sympathy for the terrorists, I mean, would she say that if it was Muslims and ISIS? We feel sorry. We feel so sorry for the Yazidis and the Islamic State fighters who died yesterday. No, they wouldn't fucking say that for fucking miles.
That's a really good point. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Well, I said this on BBC. Remember we talked about BBC, and I don't mean
that's a really good point.
But I said, what's the difference between a Baghdadi's head on a platter and Putin's head on a platter? I said the language.
Having been to Syria, that point really resonates with me. Having fought ISIS and gone down to help the Kurds, you saying something like that really hits home. It's like, would she have said, I feel sorry for all the ISIS guys that have really been shot, beheaded all the Jordanian pilots. I feel sorry for all the ISIS soldiers. No, she wouldn't have said that. Yeah. But this is an ICC wanted war criminal who's stolen 20,000 Ukrainian kids who won't give them back, dribs and drabs maybe, who murdered and killed his way through doing the most awful atrocities in Bucha, Irpin, Mariupol, who had Nazi-style filtration camps in the east of Ukraine, for which I was held in one. And they're sitting there going, I feel sorry for all the Russians that are being killed. Putin organised that crap. He made the decision to come across the border.
That's correct.
It's all the blood lies with Putin. So here, Levitt say that was just infuriating, but she's just regurgitating what Trump wants her to say. She's just casually, saying stuff that's going to irritate. Or the worst thing I saw today was, I think it was something to do with the Board of Peace, where Trump was saying that even Ukrainians like Witkoff.
Right.
And I was watching this, and I was watching the feed, all these Ukrainians going, you can fuck Witkoff. You could, get him around my house. Which Ukrainian said that? I was watching all these things.
Right.
They hate him. He's never even been to Ukraine. And there's Witkoff sitting there like a gormless goof, grinning at this board of peace because Trump said, yeah, even the Ukrainians like, if that's where Trump is, he's so off the grid, off the planet, that he has no idea what's going on because Ukrainians hate him. Every Ukrainian hates him. They're not even elected officials. So you've got a peace process where already, as I said in my piece this week, the foundations of that are rotten. They're built on sand. It's only ever going to fail. It's not going to go.
Well, I appreciate that people, the quality sources that are paying attention to Witkoff's profiteering, including the Wall Street Journal, have made it very clear that I'm trying to get. Someone asked about the source of I'll give you the Guardian link in the chat about the source on the photo. By the way, you mentioned one of our viewers mentioned Vlad Vexler, who follows me on Twitter, so I've invited Vlad Vexler to come talk to us. I really kind of find his commentary interesting. But Witkoff, in the amount of profit that's been made between him and Kushner in this, and the fact that Kushner's name was at the source of the Tulsi Gabbard whistleblower complaint, it shows a lot about what's going on and why they're to be called out. And I wrote this article, 2 months ago at least, about how Witkoff's position is essentially illegal. There is no ordained position for him to be that. You can call him whatever you want, but when we call him the president's emissary, or envoy, and when we honor it, we're lending agreement to a lie. And in particular, I always find it important for Americans to go back 250 years to the founders and during our Federalist Papers era, when the newfound little colony turning into a nation had this problem where they had shadow diplomacy from different folks that had European pull. We know that Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and others had their various interested parties in Europe, and then they would send their parties out to go arrange deals, and it was ad hoc. And that's why the founders literally wanted to have an appointments clause so that you didn't have such a thing. So you literally had an accountability role for someone like Witkoff. And I've said for months that Witkoff's position is illegal. No one has to observe it. And I mean that at journalist level. I mean that at policymaker level, so that the people who don't repeat it at the journal level, when they say the president's envoy, and they say it in the New York Times, or they say it in Washington Post, or they say it in BBC, they lend agreement to a lie. I mean, you can put that in quotes that he's the envoy, but he doesn't have a status position. And one other person I have no problem dinging on a regular basis is Megan Mobbs and her general serial, as my Ukrainian friends call him, Keith Kellogg, and that they consistently keep pushing the narratives that we're going to eventually talk about, like requirement for elections in Ukraine, and not a goddamn word about the Kremlin. And Megan Mobbs is a trained PSYOP officer. She trained at West Point. She was an officer level, and her specialty was psychological operations. So she knows strategic communications. She's not a dummy with a keyboard.
No. I've had my run-ins with her. And to be honest, I accepted some of what she said. I challenged her dad. I said things I probably shouldn't have done, and it made me relook at how I tackled topics on the internet. Maybe I was too vocal, too personal, and I accept that. I accepted that. She was right. However, during those times when he was working for Trump, he was saying some random badass Russian narrative crap, and I'll say that he was. And what's become clear is people are Trumpites. They would do anything and say anything,
right?
To basically. Would keep him in office, a Republican. Right. He isn't a Republican at the end of the day.
I'm friends with a lot of Republicans. They can't stand Donald Trump. He's still everything that they despise,
Exactly. So it's we had similar things with the New Labour and Tony Blair. You can see why he's attracted to Trump. We had the same sort of thing.
Bush's poodle.
He didn't last. So I've had my run-ins. She was right on that. There are she does some good stuff here with veterans, and we've talked about that and buried the hatchet. But certainly, I'm absolutely confused if she's done psyops. It was so blatantly obvious that it's a Trumpoid or a slightly different take against most Ukrainians. I just don't get it, which is why you get a lot of people criticizing what she's saying, because it's a Trump, it's a MAGA view.
And let's go down that road just for a
Keith
second.
Kellogg, just finish this.
Yeah, of course,
Keith Kellogg's generally a good guy. I don't know him personally, but I know some people I respect who say he's generally quite a nice guy and a good guy. And since he's come away from this, he's started to be a bit more vocal about Zelensky, Ukraine, Putin, about, more of a pro-Ukrainian stance, which the Russians probably got right, is why they didn't want him at any negotiations, because he would balance that out, and he isn't pro-Russian, which is exactly why they want Witkoff, because he's easy, manipulative. They would have done their homework on him. They would have done profile on him, and they want easy Kushner. He would just do what he's told because he's Trump's, son-in-law. And then you've got Witkoff, who's just dumb as shit, pro-Russian idiot, who's never even been to Ukraine. So of course they're going to pick him. They don't like Kellogg because he can balance that out. So while I've had my run-ins with mega mobs and the Kellogg's, which I don't intend to do again, let's make that clear. Certainly I would say their homework, and they're picking all the guys they can manipulate, control, and push.
Well, when I recently turned down a press job that I was very honored to go discuss, the thing I said at the interview was, it's going to be very hard to let go of what I know I have to do, which is occasionally call out an American that's full of shit. And and I'm not wired after all these years. Maybe if I was younger and trying to do like the career building side of it, I do a lot of this part reluctantly, meaning I love doing the work, but I love doing the work so long as it's unfettered, and that the ground truth is justified by reality check, and whether or not Ukrainians, when they see it, go, yeah, you get us. And so I want to capitalize on that for our last part of this little bit. And we'll have to do another segment on Sunday, because I know you've got a lot of, you're very busy and popular.
I'm on Prague. I'm talking to Prague at 8:30. So, yeah, that's quite interesting.
So I want to show how the fact that we live here, when we hear things in the discussion space, and they could be like our civilian friends who are doing great support on Twitter, and I really appreciate that they do. But I think they sometimes misunderstand where we may be coming from. When we live here, we hear things that are not in line with how we know life to be here. And I'll say the caveat that here in Ukraine, there are a range of views. There are so many views. But there's still a layer that's very Ukrainian, and then there's the outside world's view of what that means about Ukrainians, and they are really radically different. And so as a Brit, you'll see it in one aspect, I see it in a different one, but we both see the Ukrainian sphere first, because we live here. And so when we hear them say things about, well, for instance, I think there'll be elections, or I think that the Ukrainian people will do the following. And you and I go, no.
No.
It's not going to happen.
That's not going to happen.
Who's saying this to you?
Yeah,
how do you think that's going to be? And it's been everything from mobilization to elections to who's going to surrender territory to how Zelensky is the lone actor of power when he's not.
He's got a spring in his step this year. I mean, he's looking great, tired, but I mean, he's got a reinvigorated energy, because he knows that we've got Putin on the ropes. Putin, where we sit now, Putin needs to take home a victory. He's lost 1.2 million people. Right now, at this present time, he's bartering for Donetsk Oblast. This was like I said earlier, he came in to try and take Kyiv.
And he's trying to get the White House to demand it for him. Because
now he's trying to get the White House to demand. This is where Russia reality sits right now.
Right.
So we're at that point where Trump's now trying to defend him through the media, whether he's slow to react. Russia is losing this war. Putin knows he can't stop the war. There's going to be no peace because he's got no trophy. And Zelensky knows that. Zelensky knows that he's got looking for Donetsk so he can get the off-ramp, get out of the war with a trophy and say, we've got Donetsk go blast. That's what we did it for. That's what we're going to take back. Zelensky knows that. He's going to push it till after the midterms, if he's got any sense. He knows that, so he knows what he wants. He isn't going to give it to him because this puts more pressure on Russia. This puts more pressure on Putin because Putin wants Zelensky gone. What it's turning into now is a potential chance with the power shift and the developments that have happened over the last couple of years to now it's Zelensky's turn to give back what he's had for 2 or 3 years. And it's just convincing the Trump administration that Russia's losing. And I think we're at that tipping point. I think we've got more chance of saying that now. The same recycled efforts Putin's making on the winter. Failed the first winter, last winter, and the winter before that. He spent billions on it. If you listen to the economists and all the people that are writing now about the Russian economy, it's flatlining. It's days now. It's never struggled this much ever. So you've now got the inflation at its highest. Food's gone up. Cucumbers are like
exactly
huge.
And one of our viewers, I don't know if Barbara's still here, but she says, how long will Ukrainians? One of the first questions earlier. How long will Ukrainian citizens have to live between metro stations and their homes? Can they keep this up? So on the civilian front here, which I think is very important for people to remember when we talk about what Ukraine can endure, I will answer first by saying that I don't know any Ukrainian, including that have radically different views on how the government should handle things, that is so tired as to suddenly want to be Russian subjects.
Absolutely.
Or to roll over and have the country fail at a catastrophic level. So as a starter point, that's where I'm at. What do you think? What do they need to think about the civilians?
Don't know anybody. I tried to explain it to the Welsh politicians I saw today that were here, and they were, and the way I described it was, okay, let's take Dnipro City. Dnipro City is probably the size of North London, with a huge river running through that separates the city through the center of the city. That's longer and wider than the Thames. So it's a massive city. Yes, we get bombed. Yes, they hit places, but there's 90% of the city that's not even been touched. I put on my feet, it's not a city under stress. Yes, the war's closing in. Yes, it's not a Zaporizhzhia just yet, but it's inching closer. Kharkiv, Russia can't take Kharkiv. They're going to need 200,000 troops to even tackle Kharkiv. That's before then you get the other 200,000 troops you'll need to manage that. That's just the city of Kharkiv. They won't be able to attack it without losing many more men.
And everyone I know at Kharkiv, they are more durable and rugged in their behavior towards Russia than just about anyone I know. I mean,
and they live next door to it,
Kharkiv,
with 30 kilometers from it, and they have
cabs being dropped on a regular basis on the buildings,
just making more anger. And now Russians are losing ground around that area. So this is, Russia's not winning this war. The troops are getting demoralized. All you're going to do if you forcibly mobilize people in Russia to keep that war continuing, which is going to happen. There's no other way he can do it now to keep the war going. He's going to have to forcibly mobilize people if he still wants to continue. Is that then you're looking at training. Russia's doing 2 weeks training and shoving them to the front. They have no value in infantry whatsoever. Those guys are going to know that if they get called up, they're going to potentially come back with a leg missing or they're going to die. They know that. Then the war becomes about essentially casualty rates forcing quality over quantity. I think Ukraine's got this in the bag. This is a war we've never seen before. I think if you go back to the start of the war when drones just took out big bits of equipment, tanks, artillery pieces, command centers, or, things like that, to now where drones are taking out individuals. And there's a drone war that goes up where they can now notch up 30,000 hits a month.
Right.
If Russia does raise another 1 million troops, how long is that going to last? Another couple of years with drones whacking down on them? Ukraine doesn't have to advance anyway. It can pick areas and pick, areas off as and when it wants to. Yeah, they're going to lose. But Russia now, in my day, you would lose... if you were on an assaulting army, you would lose 3-1. You could expect to lose three assaulting troops to every one defensive troop. Generally, the rule of thumb was you're probably going to lose 5-1, essentially, on some areas. with the advancement of innovation of drones, you're probably losing 10 to 15 to 1. Most of those will get killed before they even get to see an enemy trench. Inform up points, start lines, organization areas, areas where they form up to launch the assaults, training depots, You're not even going to get to see a guy if you get called up. So if you're losing 15 to 1 to launch an attack, most of those guys aren't going to last, especially with flamingos, more advanced drones, drone swarms. Right. Now that you're...
And not only that, the investment class, and I had this discussion with Alexander Kharchenko yesterday about the energy sector. I asked, are countries and enterprises beginning to ask better questions about what they can learn from Ukrainian durability during the airstrikes on the energy system, and and there is an uptick in, like, I'm sorry, how do you do that? What is it, the lesson we had to learn? And he pointed out that in the West, I was really, really happy when I said, well, I'm from Texas, so if a dog pisses in the backyard, our power grid goes down. He says, I know about this. I know about what's happening in Texas, and he does. So he was very clear. But he said something that you and I know has happened when it comes to the training, the need to train from Ukrainian point of view, the need for investment in Ukrainian military buildup, meaning the infrastructure here and the connections that will build up, not just drone tech, but other forms of military tech. And then this infrastructure side that is saying to countries abroad, are you war ready? Yeah. No, you're not.
ISR, yeah. Big one. Are you ready for war? NATO's starting to get to understand it's not. Right. And this is another byproduct of the war, is that if Russia did launch an attack on NATO, it's already up its defense spending. It's already got Ukrainians training Germans. It's already got that, systems in place where it's going, we're not ready. And we need to start arming to the teeth, getting our kit together, start making more weapons and bombs. Because Russia needs to be deterred. NATO's a defensive pact. It's not going to go into Russia. It's not going to challenge Russia. Russia feels it's imperialist by nature and is losing this war. That's a really dangerous time, because you've got a president then who's in control.
Yeah, once losing is when certain psychopathy will be revealed, because now you're when you're confident, you could take a liberty. When you're losing, all knives are out.
Yeah, it's a dangerous time in my view. We're it's taken 4 years to get to a critical point. And to use Churchill's phrase, we're not at the beginning, we're not at the end, but we're definitely at the end of the beginning. I think we're probably halfway through. This has already gone on longer than the Great Patriotic War.
That's right.
I don't see any peace. I don't see it changing. In fact, escalation, the attacks on Ukrainian cities have gone up since Trump's tenure, escalated considerably over the start of this year.
Yeah. I published a report this last week. I think I sent it to you here on Substack, where I took all the metrics from 3 different Telegram accounts that basically track all of that, compared them out, and made sure there was no overlap, and then showed the grid from 2022 until current day. And you can clearly see Russia feels very emboldened by Trump. The ability to just launch an attack, kill people, get back on the phone, say, "Hey, Donald, how's everything?" Maybe we'll meet. We'll meet tomorrow. Would you be okay to meet tomorrow? We're going to do this. We got some football matches coming. Were you good for that? Hey, Donald. How are things? So it's a pattern.
Every meeting he has with Zelensky, who's he on the phone to first? Putin.
Yeah.
So he's already getting there before Zelensky has a chance to even talk to him. So I think there are some people. I think Rubio, as much as I don't like him, don't trust him, and think he's full of crap most of the time, he's definitely the best politician that America have at the moment. He's a bit more diplomatic, cunning. But Trump only uses the diplomats to talk to the friendly countries, which is so you have it. All the people talking to the unfriendly countries that want to see the death of America, he sends Witkoff and Kushner. And,
pretty much.
That is
right.
It's blanket where America sits at the moment. So, you got to ask those questions of why does he send 2 inept people that are not diplomats to countries that want to see the death of America.
Right.
It's slightly concerning that the diplomatic corps is being left on the bench when it comes to talking to Russia. It's bizarre. And the only word.
Well, similarly, I haven't finished this
around.
article because I like to take my time with a lot of the details. So when I wrote an article about what districts in America are invested or not investing in the supplement of Ukraine's weapons, basically rebuilding the shelves for American weapons first and then offsetting to Ukraine. That's over 2 years worth of research. I just finally took the time to put it into words for everyone. There's a lot of these pieces are like that, but some of the others that take me time is I was looking at the delegation, if you will, of the Russians that are at the table. And they don't have diplomatic experience. They have other experience. And they're the ones at the table. Of course, they all have intelligence connections. However, the delegation sent by Russia is always a manipulation in and of itself. And why does that matter? I've been honored to sit in front of real ambassadors, and they speak a whole different language. Whether it's the Canadians, I had a 3-hour session with the Indian ambassador that used to be here, Harsh Kumar Jain, speaks a whole different level of discussion. I don't want to say a different level of English, but it's just a different mindset that's in the diplomatic class, very trained. And yet then there's this side that's purely transactional. They're in America, they're done because of contributions. In Russia, they're done because what the Kremlin wants to use as a tool device.
Absolutely. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I mean, they're very smart. Putin's built his whole presidency on 25 years of learning KGB tactics on how to manipulate people. And you've got Witkoff in there.
Right.
Who's sitting going, you've stolen kids. But anyway, how are we going to make some money? And realizing that he's already dealing with Kirill Dmitriev, who's the financier, the Russian, the big money man for the Russian sovereign fund, which is slowly, running out of money. So
Kirillov and those guys were involved 12 years ago in so many layers of the hybrid warfare invasion of Ukraine itself. They're behind the scenes in all of those communications. I know when I did the Glazyev tapes story about Odessa, and I'm still working on it because I have another tranche of emails to go through, all finally exfiltrated by our great Ukrainian hackers. But the Glazyev tapes were actually intercepted by SBU, and he was talking to Kirillov. He was interacting with folks that we see later in diplomatic circles making decisions. But at that time, they were a little less known to the West, or the people who are now paying attention. And they were the Kremlin money men in between the fake Odessa resistance that burned in the Trade House fire on May 2nd, 2014. They were involved in trying to facilitate the Kharkiv operations that were trying to seize Kharkiv, the same way that they did successfully seize Luhansk and Donetsk at the police stations, etc. Since we're at this 12-year mile marker, I think it's important to keep in mind who was active then, who's still active now, and paying attention to how many times they get set at the table across from a Witkoff, a Kushner, with an Umarov and Budanov sitting at the table too, trying to carve this country up. Of course, on our side, we have guys defending it.
Sorry, I'm just got a question.
Of course.
Yeah, it's very, very correct there. I mean, what we're saying about Russia manipulating the American team. You've got some pretty experienced people in the Ukrainian government doing exactly the same thing. But as I said to somebody today, while people still 4 years in are going, oh, don't worry, it's just Ukraine. And you're going, this is Ukraine that's held back the second most powerful army allegedly on the planet. This is Ukraine that's launching attacks into Russian territory, Operation Spiderweb, taking out 1/3 of Russia's nuclear bombers. This is the Ukraine.
This is the Ukraine,
Ukraine, who got dominance of the Black Sea by Russia. Totally a bit gone.
That's gone in my latest GER, the owls are not what they seem article.
The best thing that Ukraine have got is people always underestimate them. And I was sitting there at the very start of it, before the full-scale invasion, going, dun, 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 you have no idea what you're fucking dealing with. You don't want to underestimate these guys. These guys know how to fight a war, you know.
Right.
And if they're not going to fight it full-on front-on in trenches, they'll do it guerrilla style. And they'll fucking win at that. This is not a war Russia's going to win. And, you know, I've had my faith in Ukraine all the way from the word go. And I'm still alive here with all my digits to say it's not changed. Russia's not winning this war. It's gradually realizing it's made a mistake. The country realizes.
One more to give him some props was the one with Denis Nikitin, the reward that the GER intercepted by faking his death and then taking taking the reward and re-weaponizing that against the same enemy.
The killing of generals in Russia is massive. People don't realize how massive that is because, one, it gets people in the country thinking...
It's like espresso in the morning. Give me another one.
How do we beef up the internal security? We've got to spend more money on doing it. We've got to get more people doing it because our generals are being killed. Not to mention the fact that of the morale that does by killing and assassinating a general in the country. Ukraine just doesn't get the same press when that, or you know, just doesn't happen in Ukraine as much as it's happening in Russia. But then you've got the additional propaganda wins that's causing. You know, how can we not protect our generals? What's the protection corps doing? You know, Putin's then trying to hide the fact that it's Ukraine, but that's having a detrimental effect on the Russians. It's Ukraine suddenly killing all these generals. Well, that's success that we're not. You know, Ukraine's not going to go. They're just if they didn't do it, they'll just remain silent for starters.
Right.
So even if they didn't kill the general, they're just going to sit there and go, just let them think we killed them.
Correct.
Because that's only going to benefit us anyway. The Russian, when you start to realize where Russia's actually at, and the propaganda is backfiring, their own propaganda backfiring, they're lying outright to their own people. Right. You realize how in a desperate situation and how this machine is now not a machine. It's an isolated bunch of idiots and egos. And Putin's a small part of that now. And that's really showing just by the propaganda that's coming out of Russia. It's changed. The swagger's gone, I'll call it. The swagger's gone and it has gone. It's not coming back.
I strongly believe civilians learning how to read the news better and applying a different way of reading the news.
For sure.
Can also learn how to reverse engineer a psyop against them by seeing, like, wait a minute, so the propaganda says this. Why would you write that type of propaganda? You would write that propaganda to behavior nudge us this direction because of this. But what are you afraid of when we're, you know, and just take the time with how something.
Keep asking why.
Why that was the choice of the message of the day. The message of the day.
The Russian propaganda is solely geared up to justify tomorrow's narrative.
Has become an expert in marketing, in my view. I liked what Dan said because actually, an Army PSYOP buddy of mine who signed off of my workshop build, he says, "You kind of get what we do." I said, "It's called marketing."
Yeah, if you replace, that's true. When you replace words, you go like something like tenant media that was a big problem, right. And you'll get your Tim Paul getting paid $100,000 per podcast, which is garbage podcast, not worth the money, and you don't challenge where that money's coming from. But then you find out it's the Russian state that's giving you that money.
Right.
That's if you take that's a fifth column. I don't know whether you're affiliate, you understand probably what a fifth column is, but to the people that don't understand what a fifth column is, those are the people that are indirectly knowing or not knowing, who are not military, not official propagandists, who are working for a foreign state.
Right.
And that's your tenant media. That's your Tim Pauls, whether they know about they're getting this money from the Russian state or not. That's your fifth column, undermining the current government and the system of America to benefit a foreign government. That's what that is. And that's the merge and the crossover. If you take away all those posh military phrases and, fifth column and those, spy phrases.
The military acronyms.
It's advertising. And you can do it with so many things when you put it into a context. They're being paid to advertise a foreign state. at the end of the day. And
also, there's an interesting set of algorithms that we'll talk about in the future. I've got some research I'm doing on this. Years ago, a person who ran he worked with a major digital marketing company that's similar to what Palantir is. In other words, just massive data hoarding. Called up our terrorism firm and said, we need to have a private comms ASAP. We accidentally detected something. Now, this was a firm that's not focused on military stuff, certainly not focused on terrorism. It's designed, as he said, if you want to know precisely which districts in America will sell the best purple purses over the longest period of time, we're the ones who you can call that will tell you that. But let me show you what we found. And what they found is that they could quickly identify terrorism portals on the internet with just a couple of keystrokes change in the code that would just, deviate that direction and detect terms. We could give it to them and say, well, here's who we're looking for. No problem. They're right here, 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 and here, here. And using that in modern weaponized scope allows both the enemies to do that with us, but also reverse engineer to do that to their nodes and say, really? Well, then if that's the case, sleep well tonight, Russia. We're all in your comms.
Yeah, well, just look at all the transcripts that somebody got of Witkoff trying to coach the head, the people, the top people in Russia to manipulate the president of the United States, and he's still in a job. I don't understand any of that, but I'm going to have to make tracks soon because we're going to have to do this again Sunday because we haven't finished half of what we're going to talk about.
Right. Actually, we have some metrics to go over. So let's do this. You just tell me the timing works for Sunday. I'll reschedule or I will add it into a schedule for everybody. And I will be coming on here in under 2 hours with a journalist here, Yulia, who I think we're going to have a nice discussion about what life is like here in Ukraine and here in Kyiv. And then tomorrow I have Frank Figliuzzi on, and on Sunday I have the liberal trucker, who's a very interesting guy I like to watch on Instagram. He's funny. He's one of these guys who gets in the car and says, like, if you don't like what I'm saying about Donald Trump, and I read your comments, buckle the fuck up. And this guy got my attention months ago. He's one of these few people who just really made me laugh. And I told him, I said, why don't you come on? Let's talk to the audience. And part of the reason why I want to do this is because I think our friends and our followers and supporters out there like to hear directly from these folks. I'll also add, before we end this broadcast, I was very honored to meet our awesome Olympian, Vladislav, yesterday. And he's an amazingly humble, super genuine guy. And when I say heart in the right place, it's not even the best terms. It's just he's got it, Moladet. So I told everyone, I posted on Twitter yesterday. I told him that I knew a lot of people who were our friends abroad who would love to say, congratulations and well done. So to everyone watching right now, please know that Vladislav personally knows that you guys were paying attention at that level, and we'll be bringing his voice to you one way or the other on this platform.
That's cool.
And we've got a lot we're going to do. So we will see you on Sunday, brother. Go get that.
Yeah, we'll do a bonus one. And we'll go back to 9 o'clock next week because that's a really good time where people are home and stuff doing that. And then thanks for everybody turning up again. We know, I said earlier on, we had 140 people on last week. Not so many this week, but we do get thousands of people now watching the
replays,
which is great. And our goal was to really explain to people who don't follow the war like we do what we think is going to happen and what we think is going on, and so they can get to understand it a little bit better.
How do you like being a journalist?
I think we're living in one of the most amazing times. Like I said to you, somebody said you've gone from the most dangerous job in the world to the second most dangerous job in the world, especially when you're talking to Russia. So I'm still living a risk. I still enjoyed it, finding my feet. I still love doing the non-war reporting as well. And good stories that I'm going to write about tomorrow, as well as the keep talking about the negative side of what we're seeing. So the balance is good. I have to keep some positive, because there's a lot of positivity going on. Just doesn't get reported, and nobody's interested in it unless you're saying things like Russia's dying or Russia's crumbling, and then people still keep then they're interested in the topic. Otherwise,
make sure you're. I mean, a lot of you probably are already following Shaun's account, but I found last week when I mentioned that some people weren't yet, and they are now. Pay in as well. Get the $5.
We got some problems with that at the moment. I'm just sorting. So some can, some can't. It depends on the account setup.
Yeah, I heard someone couldn't pay, but work it out. And thank you for
we're gonna work it out.
Get the $5 a month at the very least, so we can make sure he stays focused on this. And I will say one more thing, as a journalist who really does the work part of it instead of just reporting. It's the sky that's reporting. Journalism requires a lot more work, and you're really doing that. I love talking to you when I see you're on fire about a project and you're really underneath the gears, pulling all the stuff apart to package it back for the audience ahead. And I really
get people thinking of the options. So I really enjoy it. So just getting people to think about the situation rather than what the media does and what projections, for the future. So no, it's great. We've not been wrong many times yet, so thank you for everybody watching. And
absolutely,
we'll do a special bonus episode on Sunday to finish off what we've started. But now I'm on the blower to Prague.
Go take care of the Czechs. We'll see you soon.
Doing my best Eurovision. England 0 point.
0 point. Na dobranoc, everyone. Slava Ukraini, heroям slava.
Good night, everybody. Dobronoci.
I president Rosyjskiej Federacji.